Hi, welcome to another video on my modeling channel. Today I would like to finish this 1/72 scale model of a Su-85 tank, which I've started a long time ago. The main reason why I couldn't finish it earlier was because I didn't have enough paints to achieve the weathering effects I wanted to do on this model. But finally I have the paints and I can finally finish this model, so let's not wait any longer and begin. I started from disassembling the model. I removed the stowage and the spare tracks from the front, and I also took off the running gear sub-assemblies. In my previous video you can see how I glued them together to make them easy for painting. The process of improving the paint job on the tank, I started with a rather simple task. I mixed those two oil brushes together to get a light green oil paint and applied it to the wooden logs to recreate moss. For blending of the paint, I used as usually white spirit from AK Interactive. On the second wooden log I applied the paint in a slightly different way. Thanks to this I achieved more variation between them, which is a small detail that makes the model more interesting. For a long time I felt that there is something missing on the back of the tank. I was wondering what can I put there, and finally I came up with a conclusion that the best option is to place there a Maxim machine gun. I sourced it from the Zvezda kit, but I also bought Ace photo etched set to get parts like in-scale thick gun shield or better wheels. I recast most of the parts from resin to save me work in the future. To glue the resin parts together, I used Black Widow cyanoacrylate glue from AK Interactive because usual glue for plastic wouldn't work on resin. Here you can see the difference between plastic and metal gun shield, and here's how the assembled machine gun looks like. For easier painting, I attached it to a wooden stirrer using masking fluid. This way I won't have to touch it and it won't fly away during airbrushing. The part was primed as always using grey one-shot primer, and then a layer of AK Real Colors 4BO paint was applied, along with modulation just like on the vehicle. This time however I used a light green filter from Mig Jimenez to give it a slightly different tone from the tank. I applied it as a one light coat over the whole part, straight from the bottle, without any thinning. I also didn't blend it because it's a filter, not a wash. After the filter dried, I started painting details. For reference, I used photos of Maxim machine guns I took during a visit in a museum. The body of the gun was painted black, the handles were painted with light sand and ammunition belt with tan. Finally, the ammunition itself was painted with a brass paint. I'm also very sorry for the poor quality of the video here. I wasn't aware that my camera lost focus during recording, and there is nothing I could do to fix it. That's how the MG looks like after the detail painting. It looks nice, but it's not finished yet. The final effect I applied to it was a wash, the same one I used for the vehicle, dark brown wash for green vehicles from MiG. I then blended it using white spirit, and the part was ready to be placed on the model. Now I could start working on the weathering of the suspension. As I said in my previous video, I want to make it muddy, and the pre-dusting is placed in places where I want the most mud to be accumulated. The most important paint in the process of creating mud will be this heavy mud from Mig Jimenez. This is a thick paste that can be applied straight from the bottle, but if you want to add some volume to the mud, you should mix it with some sand or static grass. I'm using some fine sand. I mix it with the product and apply it to the wheels of the vehicle. I make bigger accumulation near the back of the vehicle because that's where the most mud would fall from the trucks. This product is enamel based, so you can use any enamel thinner to blend it. I always use White Spirit from AK, but you can also use odorless thinner from MIG as well. In fact, I ran out of White Spirit during this build and had to switch to odorless thinner, but I didn't notice any big difference between them. Then, I started applying mud to the back of the vehicle. This is where it will be the most visible, so I had to be careful. I applied it in small amounts and started immediately blending it. This way I was able to build up the effect in small steps and prevent any disaster from happening. As you can see, I applied it along the side where the fender is missing and around the sprocket housing. In fact, the lower hole is the place where I was practicing if the mud has correct consistency and how to apply it. As you might remember from my previous video, I painted the bottom of the tank in oxide red primer color to make it more interesting. I also apply mud and dirt there. Finally, some mud on the front, near the idler wheel, and the lower hull can be considered finished. A thing that I saw on one of my photos that I used for reference is a very large accumulation of mud on the back of the fender, so I replicated it. Final thing left to do is to add some variation to the mud on the tracks. They are already painted with brown paint, now I only add some small amounts of my mud mixture on them to add some different tones of mud on them. Now I can return to the stowage. The wooden logs were placed on the model and joined together using masking fluid. This way they will stay in the correct position once I join them together using a wire. Once the wire has been added, I glued the logs together using superglue and removed the masking fluid. Now I only need to paint the wire with grey acrylic paint and the logs are ready to be attached to the model. The spare tracks desperately need some rust on them. For this purpose I will use rust tricks and light rust wash from AK and MIG. First, I start with adding some amounts of rust tricks near the gap between each link to visually separate them from each other. I gently blend the paint to avoid removing too much of the paint or painting whole links with it. Then, I gently speckle the light rust wash over those tracks to add some random spots of lighter rust. The spare track section is being hauled to the hull of the vehicle with bolts that should be the same color as the rest of the vehicle, so I paint them with the 4BO paint. This is a small and barely noticeable detail, but it's worth adding. This is how those tracks look once finished. Now I can disattach them from the stick and they are ready to be added to the model. Speaking of the model, there is still something missing on it, and that thing is dust. To recreate it, I will use this dry earth from MIG Splashes range. This one is perfect for making dust on dark vehicles because it has a slight yellow tint in contrast with other enamel dust product I used in the past, which was more greyish and it wouldn't look as good on a green vehicle. I applied this product using a fine brush around the places where I earlier placed mud. This way, once I blend it, there will be a slight outline. I also place small accumulations or dust streaks in places where they would usually occur on an operational vehicle. I didn't wait for the dust to dry and I immediately started blending it. The dust trace is very supple, but it makes a big difference on the model, making it a little bit lighter. The time has come to place the stowage on the model and attach it for good. I start with the spare tracks, followed by the wooden logs and finally the chests. I was actually scared when I had to glue the chests onto the engine deck, because if something would go wrong, the paint job on it would be ruined and unfixable. Luckily, everything went well and the chests were finally glued to the model. A small detail that I was planning from the beginning is an antenna. I used for this a brass 2-meter antenna from RB models and glued it into the hole I drilled out in the antenna mount in the previous part. Brass is not a very accurate color for this part, so I covered it with a layer of acrylic grey paint. In the meantime, I covered the exhaust with enamel rust streaks. Then, I used this product to recreate rust on the antenna, but I also used the light rust wash to add some variety. The Maxim machine gun was the last major part left to be glued to the model. Now there are only some last finishing steps left to be done. The first, and probably the most important one of them, is covering the newly added stowage with some dust, which helps to blend all the components of the model together. I place it on the machine gun, on the chests, but the most important is to add it on the spare tracks. The front of the vehicle is very dusty and they stand out of the tank a lot. I blend the dust the same way as before. I don't wait for it to fully dry, but instead I immediately start blending it. At this point I was already using odorless thinner instead of white spirit, but as you can see there is no difference in the way the enamel paints blend with this one. The dust on the spare tracks is easy to replicate. I only add it to the lower portion of the truck and around the teeth. The empty shells come from CMK set. They are turned from brass so they have perfect color and don't need to be painted. I only add some wash on them to simulate grime and dirt. A thing that I always wanted to add to a model were leaves that fallen from the trees. This model is an autumn setting, so I chose those yellow birch leaves from AK. They fit this model perfectly. I glued those leaves to the model using PVA glue. I use old airbrush needle to place small dots of glue on the model and then carefully place the leaves on them. One of my favorite final finishing technique is adding fuel and oil stains. I think this adds a very nice detail to the model because it breaks the monotony of a matte surface. I place the fuel stains naturally around the external fuel tank, but I also place some drops on one of the chests. The last thing left to be added is smoke from the exhaust. For this I used a black pigment. With this, the model is finally finished. To present it properly, I prepared a wooden base for it. I think that those bases look the best once painted with black satin paint, so I used Mr. Hobby black paint and spray. Thanks to this, the paint layer was smooth and I didn't have to clean my airbrush afterwards. And like that, the model was finally and definitely finished. I have to admit, it was a long journey and I had learned some new techniques once working on this project. It took me a long time to finish, but I don't think it would look as good if I had finished it 1 year ago. Nevertheless, it was a lot of fun to build and paint, and I recommend 1/72 scale Zvezda model kits to everyone. If you like my models and you find them interesting, then I recommend checking my Instagram and my Facebook profile, where I post more regularly and you can find there some models I won't be making videos about. All links will be in the description of this video. Thank you very much for watching this video and I hope I'll see you in my next one. Bye.